In 1966, Hedviga Golik prepared herself a cup of tea in her tiny attic apartment in Zagreb. She settled in to watch television. At some point, perhaps within minutes, perhaps within hours, she died. For the next 42 years, no one noticed. When workers finally broke down her door in May 2008, they found her. Mummified remains lying in bed wrapped in blankets exactly where she'd been since the year the Beatles released Revolver, since the Vietnam War escalated, since Yugoslavia was still decades away from dissolution. The teacup she'd prepared sat on the table beside her chair. The liquid long evaporated. Her black and white television stood silent in the corner. Cobwebs draped across mid-century furniture that had been new when she bought it. Everything was covered in decades of undisturbed dust. The apartment had become a perfectly preserved time capsule of 1960s life, except for the body that made it a tomb. This is not a ghost story. It ests something worse. It ests a story about how invisible a person can become while still being right there. Hedviga was born in 1924 in Rijeka, on Croatia's Adriatic coast. She trained as a nurse and eventually moved to Zagreb, the capital, where she worked at a community health center in the Tresnjevka neighborhood. In 1961, she moved into an 18-square-meter attic apartment on Medvešćak street, a space barely larger than a modern parking spot. The apartment was isolated from the rest of the four-story building, accessible only by a separate entrance. The building's superintendent, Hinkovic, provided it to her. They'd been romantically involved, and he'd helped construct the building, receiving the attic unit as payment. Both were Jehovah's Witnesses. When their relationship ended, Hedviga stayed in the apartment. She had a sister who worked as a teacher in Zagreb, but they'd stopped speaking after quarrels. No other family came forward. Hedviga lived alone, worked quietly, and kept to herself. Neighbors described her as reclusive, possibly struggling with mental health issues, though this was never medically confirmed. In the 1960s, terms like schizophrenic were used casually by people who simply meant odd or antisocial. Before she disappeared, Hedviga told her neighbors she'd be leaving for an indefinite period. Various rumors circulated. She'd joined a religious sect in Macedonia. She'd moved to Belgrade to live with relatives. She'd gone somewhere far away for reasons no one quite knew. And because she'd said she was leaving, no one questioned her absence. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Decades passed. Yugoslavia collapsed into war. Croatia became an independent nation. The world transformed around that locked attic door, but inside, time stopped in 1966. Here's what makes Hedviga's story particularly disturbing. People knew something was wrong. In 1973, 7 years after she disappeared, a neighbor filed a missing person report with the police. An informal search was conducted across Yugoslavia. It turned up nothing. No one checked her apartment because everyone assumed it was empty. She'd said she was leaving, after all. The neighbors suspected she might be dead as early as 1981. How do we know? Because that's when they collectively paid off the loan settlement for her apartment. They weren't looking for her, they were looking to claim her property. The apartment became a source of dispute. Each neighbor believed they had a right to at least 1 square meter of the 18-square-meter space since they'd been jointly covering expenses. Quarrels between neighbors constantly delayed anyone actually entering. Then, in 1998, 32 years after Hedviga vanished, someone did something strange. They attached a handwritten note to her door, signed City of Zagreb, Census Commission. The note stated that Hedviga Golik had no heirs, and until ownership rights were resolved, tenants could not take possession of the apartment. Any attempt to claim it would be a criminal offense. The authorities denied ever issuing such a document. It was fake, written by an anonymous neighbor to prevent others from claiming the apartment. But it worked. The note kept everyone out for another 10 years. Meanwhile, the electricity stayed on. The bill was paid automatically, month after month, year after year, by the building's original architect. He continued paying even after moving away from Zagreb. When he died in early 2008, 3 months before Hedviga's body was discovered, the payments finally stopped. That's when the neighbors decided to act. Not out of concern for Hedviga, but because the building was being renovated into condominiums. The ownership of her apartment needed to be resolved. On May 12, 2008, 3 tenant representatives forced open the door. The scene they encountered was from another era. Everything looked exactly as it had in the late 1960s or early 1970s. The furniture, the television, the decorations, the teacup. Thick dust covered every surface, cobwebs filled the corners, the air was stale and cold. And there, in her bed, wrapped in blankets, was Hedviga. Her body had undergone natural mummification, a rare process that occurs when conditions are just right. The isolated attic apartment had apparently stayed cold and dry, with windows possibly left open. Instead of decomposing normally, her remains had dried out and preserved. This meant there was little to no odor of decay after the initial period, which explains why neighbors never smelled anything unusual, or, if they did, they ignored it. The police arrived. The Institute of Forensic Medicine and Criminalistics conducted an autopsy. They concluded she'd most likely died during a cold season, and that the apartment's isolation allowed mummification to set in undetected. They couldn't determine her exact cause of death or the precise date the body was too degraded. Based on various accounts, they estimated she died sometime between 1966 and 1973, most likely in 1966. A police spokesperson said, "So far, we have no idea how it is possible that someone officially reported missing so long ago was not found before in the same apartment she used to live in." Hedviga's body was buried the next day. No family members claimed her remains. No one held a memorial service. She was born alone, lived alone, died alone, and was buried alone. The story made international headlines when it broke. People were horrified, but perhaps not entirely surprised. Hedviga's case is extreme, but it's not unique. Similar stories emerge regularly from cities worldwide. Joyce Carol Vincent died in her London apartment in 2003 and wasn't found until 2006, 3 years later, with her television still on. Pia Ferenkov died in her Detroit home and remained undiscovered for 6 years. In Japan, the phenomenon has a name, kodokushi, or lonely death. Thousands die alone each year, some undiscovered for months. What Hedviga's story reveals is darker than just individual tragedy. It exposes something broken about how we live, now how urban density paradoxically creates profound isolation, how busyness becomes an excuse for not noticing, how assumptions replace actual checking, how property disputes can supersede human concern. Her neighbors passed her door for 42 years. They walked up and down stairs, lived their lives, raised families, had their own struggles and joys, all while Hedviga's body lay undiscovered just meters away behind a locked door. They suspected she was dead in 1981. They knew the apartment should be checked. But the fake note on the door, the fear of legal complications, the assumption that someone else would deal with all of these proved more powerful than the basic human impulse to make sure someone was okay. When we read Hedviga's story, we want to believe we'd be different. We tell ourselves we'd have knocked on the door, called the police, insisted someone investigate. But would we? How many of our own neighbors could disappear tomorrow without us noticing? How many already have, and we just assumed they moved? The teacup sitting on that table for 42 years haunts me most. She made tea. She was planning to drink it. She was doing something so ordinary, so human, so alive. And then she wasn't. The tea went cold. The dust settled. The world outside changed almost beyond recognition. Yugoslavia became history. Technology transformed daily life. Generations were born and grew up. And inside that apartment, time simply stopped. Hedviga Golik didn't disappear. She was there the entire time. We're the ones who vanished. We the neighbors, the community, the world that walked past her door every day and never thought to knock. Her story isn't about death. Death comes for everyone eventually. Her story is about invisibility, about how easy it is to become forgotten while still being present, about how loneliness can be so complete that your absence becomes indistinguishable from your presence. In our hyper-connected world of constant communication, Hedviga reminds us of a terrible truth. It's never been easier to be surrounded by people while being utterly, devastatingly alone. When they found her in 2008, that teacup was still waiting. 42 years, waiting for someone to come home, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. No one ever did.